Women's Treatment Centre.
The basis of the therapy that we underwent was the idea of demonic possession.
Accused of being run like a religious cult.
When you enter the Pentecostal world, almost anything is a demon.
It was a place of abuse and terror at the hands of its leader, Patricia Lovato.
We were at her will. She was effectively like God.
The shocking expose of Esther House.
If they broke Patricia Lovato's rules, they would be punished.
She would lock us in a room,
physically restrained to the bed,
pulling out demons from your stomach.
But this celebrated rehab program had support in high places.
An amazing organisation that we support as a government.
Now, allegations residents were coerced,
controlling people, putting them down, humiliating them.
And broken.
Got me to a point where I wanted to end my life.
Sorry, that just blew me away.
You can't make this shit up.
How, in God's name, was it allowed to go on for so long?
It was a cult.
That we support as a government.
Now, allegations residents were coerced,
controlling people, putting them down, humiliating them.
And broken.
Got me to a point where I wanted to end my life.
Sorry, that just blew me away.
You can't make this shit up.
How, in God's name, was it allowed to go on for so long?
It was a cult. As pure and simple as that.
Good evening, I'm Liz Hayes, and this is Under Investigation. Joining me, the Reverend Tim Costello, Chair of the Community Council of Australia and one of the nation's most respected faith leaders. Tamara Cabinet, President of the Australian Psychological Society and a practicing clinical psychologist. David Hardacre, Investigations Editor with crikey.com.au, who first broke the Esther story. In Philadelphia, Patrick Ryan, a cult mediation specialist. And from the inside, speaking exclusively tonight, Cara Phillips.
There was immense fear.
Who spent 4.5 tormented years at Esther House.
Patricia and the Esther Foundation had great standing in the community, and people with mental health problems are generally sidelined or not believed.
Esther House was set up in 1995 as a rehabilitation centre for young women with addictions, mental health issues, or who were victims of domestic violence. With government and church support, it went on to occupy this former convent in Perth until its closure earlier this year.
Fix everything, build everything, do anything.
It was led by Patricia Lovato and her husband Rod and became a recognised charity, the Esther Foundation, in 2006. Neither Patricia nor Rod had medical qualifications. Rod was a former drug addict. Patricia, an extreme believer in the Pentecostal faith, with no formal training as a counsellor.
When residents arrived, they were cut off from the rest of the world. They could only listen to Christian music, they could only read Christian material, and they had to be subject to the edicts of one person, Patricia Lovato.
Even though it was an unregistered treatment facility and subjected to little oversight by health authorities, Esther House was viewed by much of the public as a model drug and alcohol rehab centre. Troubled young women were sent there by their families, some on the advice of doctors, others were ordered to Esther House by the courts and juvenile authorities.
You just really do bring life and light to those that come around you.
All delivered into the hands of Esther's leader, Patricia Lovato, a woman who apparently believed she was on a personal mission from God. And that notion alone should have been an early warning sign, according to cult expert Patrick Ryan.
Those people that have gone through her program, we marginalize them. We marginalize people who have substance abuse, mental health issues, and then we take the person that says they can solve that problem and we elevate them.
Investigating the whole Esther story, what I'm really struck by is how leading businesses, leading politicians were seduced into supporting this, not really knowing what was going on actually.
In 2008, Patricia Lovato was recognised as one of West Australia's outstanding community leaders. She was supported by prominent locals, including former Premier Colin Barnett, who asked marathon swimming legend Shelley Taylor-Smith to be patron of the Esther Foundation.
So I was invited to a function and the Premier was there, Colin Barnett, and he approached me at the function, introduced me to Patricia and Rod Lavatar, who were the founders, and said, Shells, I think you'd be the perfect patron. And I was like taken aback, you know, and that's my introduction to the Esther Foundation. When the Premier's asked you kind of go, yes, sir.
David Hardacre, did it have an impact on you when you first looked at this story? Did you think, oh gosh, Esther House, everybody loves this place?
It did. I mean, it was actually quite pivotal. You know, part of the media's difficulty with these things are it's defamation laws. So we're going to have, you know, girls who've had drug problems, who've got, you know, mental illness problems, up against somebody who's been, you know, honoured by the government, who has attracted the attention of the Prime Minister. It makes it really very difficult.
Patricia Lovato's breakthrough moment came when fellow Pentecostalist and then Prime Minister Scott Morrison gave Esther his personal and political endorsement.
The Esther Foundation, an amazing organisation that we support as a government.
Morrison pledged $4 million of taxpayers' money to Esther House, which also happened to be in a marginal seat, and praised its work at the Liberal Party's 2019 election campaign launch.
At Esther, they are reclaiming their future and their lives by learning that no one can take away the most important thing, their unique and precious value as a human being and as a woman.
As will show, like many others, Scott Morrison and West Australian Premier Colin Barnett were also hoodwinked by Patricia Lovato. Tim Costello, the impact that Scott Morrison, the Prime Minister of Australia, citing Esther Foundation as this model, would have pumped up its reputation beyond belief.
You don't get a bigger marketing coup than the Prime Minister actually putting his stamp of imprimatur on you. That would have gone out, I'm sure, on every social media, and it would have been a protective covering to say we really now are established and we really now are untouchable.
Tamara.
Well, it's got that stamp of approval. I think it's, one of those things that whenever anyone that's standing says that an organisation is doing good, you assume that you're in the right place.
But as we'll reveal in our investigation tonight,
it wasn't an organisation that was saving girls.
The carefully crafted facade of Esther House as a place of love and healing.
Every day you would get told you had the devil in you, you were evil.
Of miracles and redemption.
We were afraid all the time.
Was, to residents like Cara Phillips, a cruel lie. So Cara, I guess you went there because you thought it was going to be a place that was good for you.
Well, I went there because I did believe that I was going to get counselling and find some help for my mental health issues. I kind of was there because I had a very specific Christian mindset that I could only seek help from other Christians, which was sort of the doctrine that I had.
But the Christianity Cara said she found at Esther House was more extreme than she could have ever imagined.
The basis of the therapy that we underwent was the idea of demonic possession, essentially, or the idea that you're just essentially evil and that there's nothing in you that is good. The only way you can improve yourself is with God, basically.
This comes out of a very American concept of this Pentecostal movement that has spread around the world, that almost anything that's wrong with us is because we're inhabited by a demon, and that demon needs to be cast away. So there's the demon of homosexuality, there's the demon of incense. When you go and enter the Pentecostal world, almost anything is a demon.
What did you think when you first heard this, David? Because Cara reached out to you.
She did. Well, you know what, Liz? I just couldn't believe what I was hearing. You know, it's
Which
too.
bit?
I think there are several bits. The serious level of control, the serious level of abuse. When I first heard them, I thought, you know, but then you go, hang on, you can't make this shit up.
Coming up,
What I witnessed in there wasn't any basis of God whatsoever.
insiders reveal the cult of Esther House.
Having hands laid on, pulling out demons from your stomach.
That is spiritual abuse. It is spiritual quackery.
When you have absolute power corrupts absolutely.
That's next on Under Investigation. Tonight we're investigating Perth's Esther House, a place lauded as a model rehab centre and refuge for young women.
We certainly feel very blessed to be part of the whole union.
Led by its extreme Pentecostal believer, Patricia Lovato.
When residents arrived, they were cut off from the rest of the world, and they had to be subject to the edicts of one person, Patricia Lovato.
I love you, and I'm proud of you.
But Patricia Lovato and Esther House were celebrated for achieving almost miraculous outcomes, even receiving a $4 million federal grant thanks to then Prime Minister Scott Morrison.
While we're investing $4 million over the next 7 years. I'm the best.
As we'll hear though, many of those seeking treatment say it was a place that stripped them of their humanity.
The whole time I was there, I always had a sense of going, this is weird, it's controlling, I don't feel right about it.
Cara Phillips spent 4 years at the centre and says she and others were made to feel they were possessed by the devil.
The basis of the therapy that we underwent was the idea of demonic possession.
These are vulnerable people and these are their allegations. What is your first reaction to that?
Well, look, from a therapy point of view, there is a couple of therapies that we know work for mental illness and, drug and alcohol addictions.
Clinical psychologist Tamara Cavanagh questions how Esther could have ever qualified for public funding.
There's therapies we typically use as registered psychologists. You would want people to have had access to those. And, hearing some of the stories, it's a concern as to how much access was there to evidence-based and scientific care.
So if not a treatment centre, what was Esther House?
It was a cult. It's pure and simple as that. It was a cult.
As our investigation continues, you will hear more extraordinary and bizarre revelations from residents who believe they were part of a cult.
It wasn't an organisation that was saving girls. There was no light in that place. It was just darkness.
The names of the most dangerous cults of modern times are well known. The Moonies with their mass weddings. The Orange people who took over an entire town in the US.
By the way, we just won first prize from the national government of Guyana for our leafy green vegetables.
And perhaps the most shocking of all, Jonestown in Guyana, where on November 18th, 1978...
All they're doing is taking a drink to go to sleep.
900 Americans died.
That's what death is, sleep.
After drinking cyanide-laced Kool-Aid with their leader, the charismatic and delusional Jim Jones.
Whatever, I'm tired of it all.
These cults may seem a world away from the Australian experience, but as you'll see, Esther House and its spiritual leader, Patricia Levata, is alleged to have operated on many of the same principles.
I think that for me, the defining characteristic of a cult is when you are living in an alternate reality and you are kind of cut off from the rest of the world, which in the case of Esther, I think that measure was met.
Investigative journalist David Hardacre spent a year probing the truth of Esther House and the power its leader, Patricia Levata, wielded over its residents.
They were cut off from family and friends for 30 days. If they broke Patricia Levata's rules, and what she said goes, they would be punished. So that, to me, does defines absolutely what a cult is.
To people who are looking for meaning or a way forward, it can be incredibly enticing. So it's that really strong personality who's charismatic and can really lead you into something that you want to believe in.
Cara, when you reflect and you hear the definitions of a cult, does that resonate?
It does, yeah. I mean, our leader is very charismatic, very strong person, and the other thing is that I think all of us were particularly susceptible to that because we were all people with brokenness and trauma. Yes, vulnerability.
Run by our amazing coordinator, Patricia Levata.
What's common to all cults or groups operating like cults is total, often blind obedience to the leader. US cult mediation specialist Patrick Ryan says the leader is pivotal. In the case of Esther, it was Patricia Levata.
This is an individual who I possibly, in the beginning, thought that she had the answer. She could be many different things, but when you're in a system where the members or the people that you're treating are telling you you're wonderful, and you're having no outside people doing any checks and balances, it's very easy to slide off into power. When you have absolute power corrupts absolutely, is the saying.
Tim, it's a potent mix when you throw in God, isn't it?
Yeah, well, this is manipulation and control, and I'm quite shocked and, speaking as a Christian, ashamed to hear of that abuse.
To Tim Costello, it is also a perversion of faith.
It becomes spiritual abuse because the most sacred thing in your life is God, giving a sense of meaning and structure to your life. And a person who takes the place of God and acts in that authoritarian way as the God figure can deeply damage you, as we're hearing.
She controlled when we ate, where we went, what we did, our words. She was effectively like God.
Amanda Gray is one of several young women we've spoken to who came to Esther House seeking treatment and support for drug addiction. Instead, she and others found themselves in an unholy program run by Patricia Levata.
We were manipulated to the point that we were told our families wouldn't want us and we wouldn't be able to achieve anything if we went home.
Chloe Payne was 15 and suicidal when she encountered Patricia Levata.
It's written in most of my journals, and there's an entry where I speak about hearing voices and then saying I think Patricia's crazy or that maybe I'm crazy, but I just couldn't tell anymore.
I was told that my mental health problems weren't in fact mental health problems. I was told it was because I had the devil in me. I was told the only help that I needed was from God.
Mandy Colker was also 15 when she entered Esther House with serious mental health issues.
I used to get told that I was bad for this world, that I was hurting my family. She knocked me down so low that I ended up hating myself. And ended up believing I had the devil in me.
You have one charismatic leader. If you speak against that leader, you are damned. There's no talking against Patricia.
Lydia Taylor came to Esther as a 16-year-old suffering serious PTSD following a family trauma.
Having hands laid on, pulling out demons from your stomach, and then they put you out on the floor with some Christian music on, and you're supposed to somehow allow the Holy Spirit to repair you, and there's no counsellors helping you through this.
Insiders also reveal another so-called therapy employed by Patricia Levata was talking in tongues.
I woke up being physically restrained to the bed by my wrists and ankles. I had about 10 or 12 adults standing around me with their hands pushing down on me, praying in tongues over me, which was confusing and scary. It was super scary.
Speaking in tongues on its own is a choice, and it may mean something, but when it's used as a therapy or inflicted, then as a faith leader, it must make you terribly uncomfortable.
Yeah, it makes me terribly uncomfortable, and I find it quite depressing that there is a literal jump from 2,000 years ago in reading the text, given all the medicine and treatments we have and the knowledge we now have to say, well, you're of the devil because you have depression or mental illness.
I remember at first just thinking, where am I? What is going on? What is this place? What are these people doing? Why are they on the floor? Why are they crying? Why are they shaking? What are these languages that people were talking in?
Tamara, psychologically, I would think if you're a vulnerable person in this framework and you've not been exposed to religion, Christianity, and somebody is speaking in tongues, that might be quite terrifying.
Look, I think probably one of the things that we really get concerned about as a psychologist is anything that might not be trauma-informed care, which is that understanding that a lot of people who suffer will often have come from a childhood that involved trauma. And I think that's probably the biggest concern, is to make sure that services and anyone delivering a service would have an understanding of that childhood and that background of trauma before they do anything that they might do and potentially make it worse.
Coming up,
she used to medicate me to sedate me.
The residents who tried to raise the alarm.
The treatment for that was I wasn't allowed to speak for 2 months.
Sorry, you couldn't speak for 2 months?
Yes.
But were ignored.
Protecting the reputation of the institution rather than who you're caring for is morally wrong, spiritually wrong.
That's next on Under Investigation. Tonight, we're investigating Esther House, a Perth rehabilitation centre for troubled young women.
We were at her will. She was effectively like God.
But as we've revealed, in reality, Esther House, led by its self-proclaimed spiritual leader, Patricia Levata, was a place where many residents experienced bizarre and cruel practices often seen in cults.
Having hands laid on, pulling out demons from your stomach.
Praying in tongues over me.
And all the while receiving support, praise and taxpayer funds from some of the state's and the country's most powerful people, including former Prime Minister Scott Morrison.
The Esther Foundation, an amazing organisation that we support as a government.
But inside Esther, residents were starting to implode.
If we didn't do what Patricia said, she would lock us in a room. There was always a consequence.
What does it mean to be good enough?
You're about to hear even more shocking allegations, where instead of therapy, many claim they were being traumatised.
How do I keep from just giving up?
And one former resident says she was pushed to the brink of suicide.
I felt defeated. I felt like there was no way of escaping Esther House while I was there. As a young teenager, it was so scary. I felt hopeless. Yeah, I felt hopeless.
Mandy Colker found herself in Esther House as a vulnerable 15-year-old with serious mental health issues. Traumatised by what she encountered, she repeatedly tried to escape, and even went on a hunger strike, during which she says she was force-fed.
Patricia would block my nose, and there was another worker there, and they started putting yogurt down my throat.
Patricia Levata, she alleges, was not only physically and emotionally controlling, but she even dictated her medical treatment.
There was a doctor that used to come to Esther House. He never did any medical examinations. I remember we'd go in a room, Patricia would tell him what to prescribe us, and then he would write a script. He never knew my past medical history. He never did a health check on me. He just followed what Patricia advised, and Patricia medicated us. She used to medicate me to sedate me.
It is an extraordinary revelation, according to clinical psychologist Tamara Cavanagh.
You would not expect a medical practitioner to turn up and not speak directly to the patient.
Oh, absolutely. No. So it would be a requirement that you do a full medical history, that you look at someone before you give their treatment, that you're aware of everything that's happening for them in a thorough interview before you would prescribe.
And also, you know, there has been a psychologist who girls and indeed their families were sent to, who was a Christian psychologist and who didn't really believe in secular therapies, but believes that God would be able to heal things. So these are, you know, professionals who have supported.
I needed help. I needed care. I needed love. I needed counselling. She got me to a point where I wanted to end my life.
Mandy spent weeks recovering in hospital.
I don't know how I didn't die. Somebody was obviously watching out for me.
When she returned to Esther House on strong painkillers and crutches, both, she says, were taken away by Patricia Levata. Cara Phillips says she witnessed this kind of treatment at Esther many times before.
You had to believe that God would heal you, and if you used the crutches, you didn't have enough faith, you know. So you had to just have faith and it would happen. And so pretty much anyone who had any kind of medical problem, that would be what happened. So, you know, if they had a sprained ankle, they had to hop on it, or if they pulled the ligaments in their knee, they had to jump off the stage to show that they had faith to be healed.
That's extreme, obviously.
Absolutely.
Tim Costello says this is blind faith from a bygone era.
Look, the sort of theology is only God is all-powerful and only God really heals. You know, most Christians believe God heals through medical doctors, and you actually do the right thing in terms of getting professional help and counselling. This is very, very extreme, and I'm very glad it's coming out.
When Cara Phillips sought treatment for mental health issues, she went to Esther House believing it would sit well with her Christian faith. Instead, Cara ran afoul of Patricia Levata for disputing her interpretation of the Bible.
The treatment for that was that for 2 months, I had to follow her, literally less than 2 meters behind, shadow her. I wasn't allowed to speak for 2 months.
Sorry, you couldn't speak for 2 months?
Yes. Not being allowed to speak was actually a common punishment, but normally it wasn't for 2 months. It was normally for a week at the most. And if I wanted anything, I had to pray and ask God that he would show Patricia, and then if he showed her, then I could have that thing, even like make a cup of tea.
Patricia Levata's order of silence was so extreme that Cara says she was even prevented from speaking to her beloved grandmother before she died.
And I went to the office and I was weeping and weeping, and she said, "What's wrong with you?" And I said, "My Nana has died." She looked at me and she yelled at me. She said, "This is not my fault." She said, "This is not my fault, this is your fault. You get up, you go out there, you stop crying, you play basketball with everyone else." And I stopped crying, and I went out and played basketball with everyone else. And from that day till very recently, I was never able to cry at my own suffering.
That's chilling.
That is spiritual abuse. and it is spiritual quackery, and I just feel devastated to hear what you're saying, Nicara.
I think that's horrible. You know, when I think about that, I absolutely, that it's the worst, because, you know, we know that when people cry, they experience really positive emotions afterwards, and it's biochemically what you need to do. So to have suppressed it for that long is huge.
Coming up,
I was shoved into the limelight.
the cynical hard sell.
It seems to me that they were actually using the troubles of
as
people
bait.
as bait.
Vulnerable young women being forced to spruik for Esther House.
You exploit your power over others. You play God.
At the time, I had a smile on my face because I had nothing else.
That's next on Under Investigation. Tonight, we're investigating the bizarre and disturbing case of Esther House.
The serious level of control, the serious level of abuse. You know what, Liz, I just couldn't believe what I was hearing.
Now we can reveal many tried to raise the alarm about their claims of abuse, but say they were ignored and silenced.
We were afraid all the time. We were afraid to speak. We were afraid to think anything that was negative.
Drowned out by Esther's persuasive self-promotion.
I had depression in primary school. I was cutting myself pretty much every day. I was on methamphetamines. I had a heroin addiction.
Using the troubled young women it was supposed to be treating.
I had the sense that going and finding troubled kids in a way was part of the business model. And so it seemed to me that they were actually using the troubles of
as
people
bait.
as bait.
Yeah.
So I'm going from a place of severe mental illness where I'm, you know, on the edge, and then just being pushed into all right, now go and tell your story at a school and tell all these kids how you're not doing drugs anymore.
Depressed and suicidal, Chloe Payne was ordered by a court to enter Esther House for treatment. She quickly became the centre's poster girl and found herself publicly spruiking for Esther.
Being the first to come from juvenile justice and be court-ordered to Esther, there was something about that story which Rob, Patricia's husband, he was very keen on. It was a good story, you know, to give to people and to tug on the heartstrings is what he used to say. So I'd sit with him and have to carefully write out my testimony, as he would call it. I was shoved into the limelight, I suppose. At the time, I had a smile on my face because I had nothing else.
That's desperately sad to hear. That marketing, that's seductive to somebody in trouble and to families particularly.
Yeah, look, it's very compelling to hear a story. When you see a story that's a success, it makes you believe that it could do that. And I guess the thing about psychology is you want to make sure that it's actually giving someone the best possible chance and that it's backed by research and outcome data, not just one person's testimony that it worked.
But it's cynical, isn't it? It's a cynical marketing exercise.
Look, it is cynical, and I think one of these features of these organisations, call them cults or whatever, is you exploit your power over others. You play God and you market and you keep it very rosy and shiny on the outside. Behind, there's often a lot of re-traumatising going on.
We do Bible studies.
What was missing from Esther's advertising was Patricia Lovata's use of fear and punishment residents allege she used to control them. Even, it's claimed, sending groups from Esther House to hunt them down if they escaped.
I attempted to run away from Esther House many of times and escape, but they would find us. They would go around in vans and find us.
Mandy Cocker says hers was not an uncommon experience.
I remember one day I'd ran away and they had the vans out looking for us. So I hid in a lady's backyard. I remember the girls found me and the lady was home. I screamed at her to call police and she did call police. I spoke to the police and told them everything that was going on. I even begged the police to take me to jail. But no, they stood and watched them forcibly put me in the van and take me back.
But where were the authorities when residents and some families complained? As we've discovered, there were numerous attempts to have Esther House investigated.
There are parents who were very disturbed about what was going on in Esther House or Esther Foundation, and they did actually, write to the federal government, which underwrites this activity actually through, giving charitable status. But those authorities didn't do their job. They didn't come in and investigate these claims at all.
But early this year, even as Esther House seemed at its most untouchable with the Prime Minister's endorsement, former resident Cara Phillips made the brave decision to go public.
I mean, for me, when I left, I was very, very afraid because at that point, Patricia and the Esther Foundation did have great standing in the community and,
But Cara says when she did make an official complaint, she was ignored.
People with mental health problems are generally sidelined or not believed, So if you're an ex-drug user and you go and put in a complaint to the government department, but then there's the Premier, who are you going to believe?
To gather support, Cara organised a Facebook group, a place for other former residents to voice their own allegations. What they wanted was a public apology. A place for other former residents to voice their own allegations. What they wanted was a public apology. A board member told Cara why it wouldn't happen.
She literally said, it's not in the interest of sponsors to hear about things that they did not have prior knowledge of.
Sorry, that just blew me away. It's not within the interest of the sponsors.
Yes. I wrote an email where I said, look, those of us who came to the Esther Foundation had all come from backgrounds where we have been silenced. Everyone has some kind of trauma. Said we came to the Esther Foundation and we were further silenced. And now, in order for your foundation to continue, you require that we stay silent forever. Where is our justice? And she said, I'll forward it to the board for that consideration.
Tim, the checks and balances should have meant, the board at least, the person in charge would have gone red flag.
Ellie, this is a terrible case of governance failure, and I hope religious institutions have learned protecting the reputation of the institution rather than who you're caring for is morally wrong, spiritually wrong, and in the long run doesn't even work. The truth is that board should have been sacked because they weren't doing their governance job. It's a total failure.
I do have a question for Tim, though. I mean, when we're talking about accountability, these things were happening known to sections of the Pentecostal Church. So we talk about, government inspectors or what have you, but I wonder where the church was on this.
Yeah, that really troubles me. Look, we know there has been systemic failure in governance in the church. The institutional abuse into children, we see that. I think humans, religious or non-religious, are often wired for power and narcissistic, powerful, charismatic types, whether secular or religious.
Allegations of abuse at the faith-based Esther Foundation.
How did it continue for so long?
There are people who continue to believe that they don't need to be accountable to secular authorities.
And what happened when these terrible claims finally came out?
It's former members having the courage to come forward and speak that will stop an organization like this.
That's next on Under Investigation.
Using the Bible and intimidation and scare tactics
Our investigation tonight has revealed shocking allegations of abuse at Esther House in Queens.
Every day you would get told you had the devil in you, you were evil.
A rehabilitation centre for troubled young women who claim it was operated like a cult.
We certainly feel very blessed to be part of the whole union.
Under its self-proclaimed spiritual leader, Patricia Lovato.
A master manipulator. An absolute master manipulator.
Women have told us tonight of the horrific treatment they say they experienced.
She would lock us in a room.
Wasn't allowed to speak for 2 months.
And the bizarre religious practices.
Physically restrained to the bed, praying in tongues over me.
That is spiritual abuse. It is spiritual quackery.
But Patricia Lovato continued to operate in plain sight for nearly 2 decades, supported by a trusting community and its leaders.
We're investing $4 million over the next 7 years. Thank you for this.
When former resident Cara Phillips decided to go public earlier this year, others who've spoken to us tonight joined her chorus.
It's been a really great experience for all of us to speak and to feel heard.
It is so genuine. You feel people are breaking the bonds of years of suppressing this story because they don't think that they're going to be believed. And so, that's I think what's happened here, with Cara actually leading the way, that people are finally being believed on this stuff.
Finally, after 20 years, authorities were pushed into action. Earlier this year, the Esther Foundation went into voluntary liquidation, and the West Australian government said it would investigate Esther's practices. And importantly, how it was allowed to operate at all, let alone for so long. The inquiry will also look at failures in unregulated healthcare facilities with the aim that what is alleged to have happened at Esther House can never be repeated.
Allegations of abuse and inappropriate behaviours at the faith-based women's residential rehabilitation facility, the Esther Foundation, were brought to my attention.
The horrific claims by residents that they suffered deep hurt instead of healing at Esther House has shocked those who had long supported it, and perhaps none more than its high-profile patron, swimming champion Shelley Taylor-Smith.
Harrowing, gut-wrenching, sickening, appalled, just really sad, because the girls they went into the program already broken.
The Esther Foundation and Patricia Lovato have since offered apologies to the residents, but it may not be enough. The Facebook page set up by Cara Phillips for victims of Esther House to tell their stories has so far heard from 250 former residents, and the number is rising.
I think that there's so much that needs to be done, in terms of things we've discussed, like the future of programs like this and, having an accredited system so that these things don't happen again.
Tim Costello, how do we prevent something like this happening again, in your opinion?
Well, I think we can say that this should not have happened, but eventually it has come to light. I think brave people like Cara are breaking the silence. I think churches and, for that matter, secular institutions saying we will demand checks and balances, accreditation, and above all, transparency.
Yes, because ultimately we're talking about a perversion of faith.
And when it comes to faith, it's really devastating to me. Faith does give meaning and community to so many lives, and it's very, very precious. It shouldn't be used in this way.
Patrick?
It's that bringing together the clergy, bringing together the psychologists, bringing together the media, and the former members having the courage to come forward and speak that will stop an organization like this and hopefully educate the public as to the warning signs of other groups that come along.
For me to see justice come to some degree is just, it's so gratifying. It's so important. It's what we do. It's what we're meant to do. It's odd that the media can be better at this than religion. Sorry, Tim.
Or other government institutions.
Or other government institutions.
The West Australian Government inquiry is expected to hand down its finding in December, but both federal and state governments are now looking at tightening rules for private drug and alcohol rehab centres.
Think I've changed this time. I don't need to turn around and hide.
And the former residents of Esther House, those who bravely blew the whistle, continue to stand together in their fight for change.
After all the time you kept.
She's still working in a rehab. She still has the, Australian Citizen of the Year. She still has all these awards that were given falsely.
Patricia Levata, it's believed, still works as an occasional counsellor at other faith-based treatment centres in Perth.
I think that there are people who continue to believe that they don't need to be accountable to secular authorities, that they should be accountable to only religious authority. And I think that that's a really major kind of struggle that is ongoing.
I just want to thank you all very much for participating in this. It's a really tough conversation, I know, and your bravery is extraordinary. Your work's been fantastic. Tamara, Patrick, your insight is invaluable. Tim Costello, a tough gig because you're the man of faith.
Yes.
So thank you, and thank you very much for joining us. Good night.